As Ruwa stood alone outside the house, tears streaming down her face, her in-laws laughed miles away, thinking they had finally erased her from their perfect family photo. But when they arrived at the luxury hotel and saw the banner hanging in the lobby, their smiles vanished, because the woman they left behind had just flipped their world upside down. Ruwa, a kind-hearted woman from a humble background, married into the wealthy Kato family, hoping for a fresh start. But from the very beginning, her dreams of acceptance were shattered. Her mother-in-law, Sifa, and her sister-in-law, Aluna, made it clear that Ruwa was not welcome in their world. They didn't see her as part of the family, just a servant in expensive clothes. Despite her efforts to fit in, she was always treated as an outsider, a constant reminder of how different she was from the glamorous life they led. When the Kato family planned a vacation, Ruwa thought it would be a chance for her to bond with them, to finally feel like she belonged. But Sifa and Aluna had other plans. They coldly told her that there was no space in the van for her, leaving her behind without a second thought. As the family drove off, laughing and chatting, Ruwa stood alone, heartbroken, with no one to turn to. They didn't care about her feelings. To them, she was invisible. The hurt was deep, but it was just the beginning of a painful journey that Ruwa would soon turn into something powerful. Little did they know, the woman they had so easily discarded was about to change everything. The morning of the trip, Ruwa woke up early, her heart full of excitement. She carefully packed her clothes, folded each dress with love, and even added little gifts for her in-laws, hoping this vacation would bring them closer. She imagined the laughs they would share, the photos they would take together like a real family. Her face glowed with hope as she waited by the door, her bag ready, her heart ready. But as the hours passed, her smile slowly faded. The house was too quiet. She called out for them, thinking maybe they were running late, but there was no answer. Her hands shook as she picked up her phone to call her husband, Kazi. The phone rang, but he didn't pick up. She tried again and again, still nothing. Then, with a heavy heart, she stepped outside, only to see that the family van was gone. They had left her behind. Her chest tightened as the cruel truth hit her. They had planned this. They didn't forget her. They left her on purpose. Tears welled up in her eyes as she called Sifa, her mother-in-law, and Aluna, her sister-in-law, but their phones were switched off too. Everyone had turned their backs on her. She wasn't part of their vacation, their joy, their family. She was just an extra they wanted to erase. Finally, when she managed to reach her husband, his words cut deeper than any knife. "Stay home and rest, Ruwa," Kazi said coldly, as if she was a child being told to stay out of grown-ups' business. No apology, no explanation, just that heartless command. Ruwa's knees weakened, and she sat on the cold floor, feeling abandoned and humiliated. The woman who dreamed of family warmth was now standing alone in the shadow of cruel betrayal. And at that moment, something inside her began to change. Ruwa sat on the floor, her heart broken into pieces. Her suitcase was still packed, her clothes neatly folded, but now they felt useless. The family she tried so hard to please had left her behind like she was nothing. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. She felt empty, small, and unwanted. Every time she thought about Kazi's cold voice, telling her to stay home and rest, fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. She felt like her world had ended. She wondered if she would ever be good enough, if she would ever be loved and accepted. As she sat there in silence, her eyes caught the old wooden box on the shelf. It was her late grandmother's box, the only person who ever made her feel special. With shaky hands, Ruwa opened it. Inside, among old photos and little keepsakes, she found a folded letter. It was yellow with age, but the words were still clear. Her grandmother had written, "My dear Ruwa, you are more precious than gold. Never let anyone make you feel small. You carry strength inside you, more than you know." Reading those words made something inside Ruwa stir. Her tears slowed, and for the first time that day she took a deep breath. She looked around her small, lonely room and whispered, "Never again." Never again would she let them treat her like trash. Never again would she sit and wait for their love. Her pain turned into anger, and her anger turned into power. Ruwa stood up, wiped her tears, and faced the mirror. The woman looking back at her wasn't weak. She was done begging. She was done crying. She had given them everything, her love, her loyalty, her patience, and they threw it away. Now it was time to choose herself. With new determination, she grabbed her phone. She made secret calls, reaching out to contacts she had quietly built over the years. While everyone thought she was just the silent wife, she called her business partner overseas. She called the hotel manager she had once helped during a charity event. She called people who respected her, people who knew her worth. As the calls went through, Rua felt stronger with every word. A plan started forming in her mind, and this time, it wasn't about winning their love. It was about showing them that the woman they tried to erase was about to shine brighter than ever. This was her breaking point, but also her turning point. Rua was done being the woman they could throw away. Now, she was ready to rise. While the Kato family was enjoying their vacation, thinking Rua was sitting at home, feeling defeated, something incredible was happening behind the scenes. Rua had been quietly working on something she had always dreamed of, building her own business. While they treated her like a nobody, she had been using every spare moment to learn, to grow, and to create. She had started an online boutique, selling handmade accessories and stylish clothes. At first, it was just a hobby, a small way to earn a little extra money, but Rua was smart and she was determined. Over time, her boutique gained attention. Her designs were fresh, unique, and soon customers started pouring in. Then, one day, Rua received a call that would change everything. An international fashion chain had noticed her work and wanted to partner with her. It was a dream come true. The first big payment she received was more money than she had ever seen in her life, and she knew exactly what to do with it. Instead of using it to make herself feel better or buying luxury things like the Kato family would expect, Rua made a bold decision. She used her first big payment to book the very hotel where the Kato family had planned their vacation, but not as a guest. No, she wasn't going to sit in the background this time. She booked the hotel as their VIP host. Rua wasn't just another visitor. She was in charge now. When the Kato family arrived, they had no idea who was behind the grand welcome they were about to receive. The hotel staff had been briefed, and now they only answered to one person, Rua. She had complete control over every detail of their stay. Her name was everywhere, from the welcome signs in the lobby to the personalized gifts in their rooms. Everything screamed that she was in charge. The Kato family walked into the hotel completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit them. They thought they were coming to relax, unaware that the woman they had left behind was now the one running the show. Every corner they turned, every staff member they spoke to, was all under Rua's command. She had turned the tables without them even knowing. Rua's business success was no longer a secret. Her quiet hustle had paid off, and she was about to make sure the Kato family knew exactly who she was. When the Kato family finally arrived at the luxurious hotel, they were excited, thinking they were about to enjoy a relaxing vacation. But as soon as they stepped into the grand lobby, something unexpected caught their eyes. A massive banner stretched across the entrance, reading in bold letters, "Welcome our esteemed partner, Rua Kato." The words seemed to echo in the air, making everything else in the room fade away. Sifa, Kazi, and Aluna froze in their tracks, their faces drained of colour. The banner, the crowd, the applause, it was all for Rua. They had no idea what was happening. Their minds couldn't grasp what they were seeing. This wasn't just a hotel, it was the scene of their worst nightmare unfolding. Guests around them, who had been mingling and talking, suddenly turned their attention to the entrance. Rua stepped into the room, glowing with confidence. She was dressed in a stunning outfit, her face glowing with pride and happiness. She looked nothing like the quiet, broken woman they had left behind. This Rua was powerful, confident, and unrecognizable. As she walked forward, the crowd began to applaud. It was clear they recognized her, not as the wife of Kazi, but as a successful businesswoman. The applause filled the room, and for a moment, Rua was the star. She held her head high, walking past her in-laws without a single glance at them, knowing full well how shocked they must be. Sifa tried to laugh it off, trying to play it cool, but there was a nervous edge to her voice. "Oh, what a coincidence," she said, trying to make light of the situation. But the whispers had already started. People around them were murmuring, eyes shifting between the Kato family and Rua. They could see the tension, the discomfort. It was impossible to ignore. Sifa's forced smile couldn't hide the panic creeping into her eyes. The reality was sinking in. This wasn't a coincidence. Ruwa was no longer the invisible wife they could control. She had become something bigger, something they couldn't ignore. The whispers grew louder as more guests began to recognize the significance of the banner. Ruwa wasn't just a guest anymore. She was someone to be respected, admired, and feared. The Kato family, once so sure of their superiority, now stood completely dumbfounded. They had underestimated Ruwa, thinking they could leave her behind without a second thought. But now, they were facing the harsh truth. The woman they had abandoned had just taken control of the very hotel they were staying in. The evening had arrived, and the grand welcome dinner at the hotel was about to begin. As the guests gathered in the elegant dining room, Ruwa made her entrance, walking with a calm confidence that left everyone in awe. The Kato family, still trying to recover from the shock of the banner earlier, found themselves in the middle of another surprise. Ruwa was not seated with them at the back of the room, where they had expected. Instead, she was escorted to the head table, the most prestigious spot in the room. All eyes were on her as she sat gracefully, smiling and engaging with the other guests, who were clearly impressed by her presence. Her in-laws, who had been used to being the center of attention, were now pushed to the back of the room. They could only watch as Ruwa, the woman they had thought of as nothing more than a shadow in their lives, took her place at the top. As the dinner began, a hush fell over the crowd, and the hotel manager, who had been quietly observing from the sidelines, took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice echoing across the room. "It is my honor to announce that our esteemed guest, Mrs. Ruwa Kato, is not only a valued partner, but she also now holds a 40% stake in our hotel chain." The words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stop. The crowd murmured in shock, but the real shock was evident on the faces of the Kato family. Kazi's face turned ghostly pale. He sat frozen, unable to believe what he had just heard. The woman he had left behind, the woman he had belittled and discarded, was now an owner of a significant part of the very hotel they were staying in. Kazi's mind raced. How had she done it? He had no idea that Ruwa had been secretly building her own empire, while he and his family continued to treat her like an outsider. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. His wife was no longer the helpless woman he once knew. She was a successful, powerful businesswoman, and he had underestimated her at every turn. Sifa, sitting beside him, tried to maintain her composure, but even she couldn't hide the disbelief in her eyes. Aluna, who had always made snide remarks about Ruwa, now looked around nervously, realizing the tables had completely turned. What they thought was their vacation, their time to enjoy luxury, had now become a nightmare. Ruwa was no longer invisible. She was a force to be reckoned with. As the dinner continued, Ruwa remained calm, her confidence growing with each passing minute. She knew the moment had come, the moment when she would finally expose the truth. The whispers and sneers of her in-laws had always stung, but now, with everything she had built, she was in control. When the time was right, Ruwa stood up, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. The guests turned to her, curious, as she took a deep breath. Slowly, she began to speak, her voice steady but firm. "I think it's time for some truths to come to light," she said, her gaze shifting to Sifa and Aluna, who looked at her in surprise. With a calm motion, Ruwa reached into her bag and pulled out a folder filled with receipts and emails. The family members exchanged nervous glances, sensing something was about to unfold, but they had no idea how big it would be. "You all may not know," Ruwa continued, "but while I've been working hard to build my future, some members of this family have been using our funds for their own luxury." She started with Sifa, her mother-in-law, and explained how Sifa had used family money to fund her lavish shopping sprees, spa treatments, and expensive vacations, all while criticizing Ruwa for not fitting into the perfect image of the Kato family. Sifa's face turned red and she opened her mouth to protest, but Ruwa was ready. She handed the receipts over to the hotel manager, who began passing them around. The manager read aloud one of the receipts. "Spa treatment for Sifa Kato, $5,000. Family account used." A gasp went through the room as the guests started to connect the dots. Then Ruwa moved on to Aluna, her sister-in-law. She showed emails where Aluna had been secretly siphoning money from the family account to fund her own expensive lifestyle, from luxury handbags to designer shoes, all while mocking Rua for her cheap clothes. The room went completely silent. No one knew what to say. The shock was evident on everyone's faces, especially the family elders, who'd always been so blind to the manipulations happening under their noses. Rua, however, was calm, cool, and collected as she laid out the truth. Sifa tried to interrupt, her face flushed with embarrassment, but it was too late. The evidence was right in front of everyone. There was no denying it now. Aluna looked like she might faint, her usual confident demeanor gone. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. Rua didn't stop. She looked at her husband, Kazi, who was sitting in stunned silence, realizing just how much he had overlooked. "This isn't just about money," Rua said, her voice now steady with determination. "This is about respect. I will no longer let anyone treat me like I don't belong." The room was frozen in disbelief as the truth settled in like a heavy weight. Rua had taken the control they thought they had over her and turned it into her own power. She smiled, knowing she had just rewritten the story they tried to tell about her. Kazi, realizing the disaster unfolding, tried to salvage what little pride he had left. He stood up, his face pale, and turned toward Rua with a forced smile. The room was filled with awkward tension as everyone waited to see what he would do next. "Rua, I am sorry," he began, his voice shaky. "I never should have let them treat you this way. Please, forgive me." The guests waited, holding their breath. Kazi's apology was desperate, a last-ditch effort to save himself and, more importantly, the image of the Kato family. But Rua didn't flinch. She didn't need his apology. The hurt he caused her was far deeper than a simple sorry could fix. She stared at him for a moment, remembering all the times he stood by silently as his mother and sister belittled her. How many times had she asked for his support, only to be met with indifference? How many times had she begged him to stand up for her, only for him to look away? With a steady, calm voice, Rua replied, "You were always silent when I needed you, Kazi. You chose your family's comfort over my pain. This isn't just about what they did. It's about the years you stayed quiet, letting them walk all over me." The guests, now sensing the depth of her words, exchanged uncomfortable glances. Kazi's face fell, the weight of her words sinking in. This wasn't the apology he thought would fix everything. Rua wasn't looking for words. She was looking for respect and action, neither of which he had offered. But it didn't stop there. Sifa, her face red with humiliation, finally cracked. Tears welled up in her eyes as she rushed to Rua, her hands trembling. "Please, Rua, please," she begged, her voice breaking. "Don't expose us like this. We were wrong, but please don't let this go public. We can make it right. I can make it right." Rua stood still, her gaze soft but unwavering. She looked at her mother-in-law, who had always tried to control her, trying to make her feel small. But Sifa was no longer the one in control. Rua was the one who held the power now, and she wasn't going to let Sifa manipulate her any longer. With a gentle smile, Rua shook her head. "This is not revenge, Sifa. This is revelation." She paused, letting her words sink in. "The truth can no longer be hidden. What you did to me, the lies, the manipulation, it all comes to light now. You'll have to face the consequences." The room fell silent. The weight of Rua's words hung in the air, and for the first time, it was clear that she wasn't the helpless woman they had once tried to control. She had taken back her power, not through vengeance, but through the strength of truth. As Rua stood there, surrounded by the hushed whispers of the room, she realized she had already won. No longer the quiet, submissive wife, she was now a woman in full control of her life, and everyone around her could feel it. With one last glance at Kazi and the family, her decision became clear. She wasn't going to play along with their charade any longer. "I'm done," Rua said firmly, her voice steady and strong. "This family, this lifestyle, it's not for me anymore. I won't be part of your game. I'll live my life on my terms, not as a puppet for your control." There was a pause in the room. For a moment, it was as if time itself had stopped. The guests were all watching her, stunned by her courage. Sifa and Aluna, who had spent years manipulating and belittling her, now stood frozen, their faces ashen with embarrassment. Rua didn't wait for any more apologies or explanations. She turned gracefully, walking away from the dinner table, her steps purposeful. As she walked through the crowd, whispers of admiration followed her. People who had always looked down on her or ignored her now saw her in a new light. As a woman who had found her strength, and who wasn't afraid to walk away from toxic people. Behind her, Sifa and Aluna stood in humiliation. The guests who had once bowed to the Kato family's wealth and influence now looked at them with disdain. The social status they had carefully built was crumbling, and they knew it. No amount of money or manipulation could fix the damage that had been done. Ruwa had shown them that true power wasn't about wealth or status. It was about self-worth and integrity. As Ruwa stepped out of the hotel, she felt a sense of freedom she had never known before. For the first time, she was in control of her destiny, and nothing could stop her. The life she was about to create, one where she was free from the weight of family expectations and manipulation, was all hers. And as she walked away, head held high, she knew she had finally broken free from the chains that had once held her down. Months had passed since that unforgettable night, and Ruwa had transformed into a force to be reckoned with. Her boutique, once a small dream tucked away in the corner of her heart, had now expanded across the continent. It wasn't just a business anymore. It was a movement. Ruwa had become a symbol of empowerment for women everywhere, proving that no matter where you start, you can rise above it all. Her designs were celebrated for their elegance, strength, and authenticity, much like the woman behind them. In every corner of the world, women admired Ruwa for her courage, her resilience, and her refusal to be silenced. She was no longer the quiet daughter-in-law, the invisible wife. She had stepped into her power, commanding attention wherever she went. Boardrooms, once a place where men called the shots, now saw Ruwa leading the way. Her voice was heard, her ideas were valued, and her influence was undeniable. But despite all her success, there was still one person who couldn't let go: Kazi. He tried to reach out, sending messages and making calls, desperate to win her back. He was sorry, he said. He had realized his mistake, he promised. He even begged her to give him another chance. Ruwa, though, had moved far beyond the man who had once chosen silence over standing up for her. She had rebuilt her life from the ground up, creating something she was proud of, something that belonged to her. She no longer needed his apology or validation. Her heart had found peace in independence, and she knew the value of choosing herself first. With a gentle but firm smile, Ruwa declined Kazi's advances. "I appreciate your apology, Kazi, but I'm not the same woman I was when you left me at that bus stop. I have a life now, my life, and I'm not going to trade it for anything." Her words were clear, her decision final. As she stood in her office, overlooking the city, Ruwa couldn't help but smile. She had rewritten her own destiny, and it felt better than anything she could have imagined. The woman who was once abandoned was now unstoppable, building her empire with every step she took. She had proved that no matter how hard life knocked you down, you could always rise, stronger and more determined than ever. And as she looked out at the horizon, she knew this was just the beginning.